Ben, thanks so much for being with me today. You and I have talked a number of times over the years, and most recently we were talking about the entrepreneurial journey and not about the life of a founder in an established business, but really going back to the beginnings, because I think it can provide so much value for folks at all stages of a business, from folks who have an idea and they're about to start a business, to people who have gone through that journey as well. So as we get started, love for you to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, Greg, thank you for having me. So I'm Ben Evans. I'm one of the founders of a company called Marathon Health. Marathon Health works with employers to provide better access to care to their employees and their families. And we do that through advanced primary care through three principal modalities. We build out on-site health centers for large employers. We have a network of health centers in focused geographies that employers can join that network. And then third, it would be a virtual solution. So patients can engage with us virtually from their home or what have you. Our goal is to increase access to care, help people get healthier and happier, leading to improved health outcomes, which ultimately saves them and their employers money. So Marathon Health, we've got about 300 health centers across the U.S. I think we're in 44 or 45 states now. I'm not exactly sure. We're actually looking at some international opportunities today. About $250 million of revenue, about 2 ambassadors. We call ourselves ambassadors, not employees, ambassadors across the U.S. So thanks for having me. And the role I play today is I'm the executive chair of the company. I'm also on the board, largest individual shareholder. We're now PE backed. At some point, most companies have to go through that process, and PE backed. Now we made it almost a decade without the PE partnership, but at some point it's the right decision for every business. Sometimes it's earlier, sometimes it's later, but for us it was a little bit later. But thanks again for having me.
And I will want to touch on that at some point, because I think it's an important part of understanding. But if we can hit rewind and go back to, I think based upon what I was listening to some other interviews that you've done, you made this decision to start the business at the age of 26. Is that right?
Thereabouts, yep.
So maybe you can bring us back to that time and what you were doing before you started the business, and what the aha moment was that brought this to fruition.
Yeah, prior to starting, so the legacy business that I founded with a friend of mine and my partner, a guy named Jeff Wells, we started a company called OurHealth. And prior to that, I was actually, Greg, doing something similar to what you do. I was in healthcare real estate, working with all kinds of companies to help them solve their commercial real estate, primarily around the healthcare ecosystem. But at the same time, I was sitting on a few boards at a health system here in Indianapolis, which is where I'm located today, and learning the provider side of healthcare. And it was really fascinating because it was my first kind of peek into the world of healthcare that's not paid for like anything else that we pay for today. Like the customer, when we go buy a car, you go to the dealership and you know what you're going to pay, or you have a little bit of back and forth what you're going to pay. You go to the mall, you buy a shirt, you know that shirt's $25. You go to lunch, you know that sandwich is $8. In healthcare, not only do you not know where you should go and why you should go there, generally, you don't know how much it costs. And principally at the time, this is in the mid 2000s, in 2005, 2006, you weren't paying for it yourself. You had an insurance company that had a financial arrangement with the health delivery system you were going to. So there's no information the patient, or in this case, the customer, was getting, which is fine, except for two things. One, the employers that are paying for it were, at least on the consumer side of healthcare, the employer that was paying for it was starting to cost shift back to employees. What I mean by that was they're going from fully insured health insurance, which means the patient's really not paying for anything. Maybe there's a small copay, to high deductible plans. And so making the patient spend the first $500 or $1,000, or in some cases $5,000 of the healthcare journey. Well, when you start doing that, but also not giving the patient the tools to better navigate the healthcare system, there's this conflict. At the same time, I was looking at the health system I was involved with, And they never talked about the consumer experience, and they never talked about the information they're providing to the patient to make sure the patient understands how much something's going to cost and be prepared for that. So that was the first kind of aha moment where I was like, okay, there's something like really fundamentally broken here. And also at the same time, employer healthcare costs are going up 8-9% a year. And that's unsustainable. So GDP at that healthcare as a percentage of GDP at this point was somewhere in the low teens. Today, it's like approaching 20%. So like an unsustainable part of our economy. But that was the fundamental, like, okay, there's something broken here. How do we build a model that solves that?
But you're in real estate at this point.
Yeah.
Right?
So I mean,
were you working in health? Did you have any experience in healthcare? Did you study?
So I did not have any healthcare experience per se. I did have a family history in healthcare. So at the time, my dad was the CEO of one of the largest health systems in the state of Indiana. And interestingly enough, my grandfather was the chairman of that health system. Totally different times. Actually, one of the legacy hospitals, not the health system. Totally different times. And there was a big gap between the two of them being involved in that health system. So I did have at least the connection from that point, but I did not have healthcare experience. I didn't go to school for healthcare. I'm not a provider by training. I had not experienced healthcare in any way other than probably the same way you have, Greg, which, gone to the doctor a few times, had a few physicals, maybe broken an arm once or twice, stuff like that. That was the limitation of my experience in healthcare.
What gives you the confidence to say, okay, I've had this aha moment, but I'm sure there might have been some doubt. What's to say that there's actually a business opportunity here?
So that's great question. So one of my best friends is a benefit consultant. So benefit consultants, for those who don't know, they consult with employers to design their health insurance strategy. As he and I were talking about this, he brought up this concept of, well, what he's seeing employers start to do is be more open to engaging companies to provide primary care directly to the employer instead of going through the health insurance. Originally, his kind of question was like, well, hey, you're in healthcare real estate. Could we just go open up a bunch of health centers in commercial office buildings and employers could join those health centers? So you think about big office towers. So like right now I'm in a 30-story office tower. I'm on the 29th floor. There's a couple thousand people that work in this building, not all the time because of, the new world we live in. But that was kind of the initial kind of nudge. And that was probably like 2006 or so that conversation happened. Now I didn't start the company for almost 3 years because I spent 2 years trying to figure out, like really trying to learn, could you do this?
All while working a day job?
All while working a day job.
Okay. So you do your due diligence, you do your research, and how do you and Jeff get together?
In 2008, I really started to get the itch to, hey, I was 28 at the time, and I was like, I really want to be my own boss. I didn't really like working for other people. And I also was fortunate. I was in a position where both myself and my fiance at the time, now wife, both of our parents gave us the opportunity not to have college debt, which is a huge advantage in life when you're in your 20s. We both owned our cars, so we had no car payments. My mortgage was, I think, $907 a month. My lifestyle, my wife had a very good job. So it was the perfect opportunity to take a little bit of risk, personally and professionally. We got married in August 2008. And I was getting closer. There's never a perfect time to quit your job and start a business. There's always some reason or some deal or some thing out there. Yeah,
Right.
It's easy. It's easy to come up. And, Greg, I was doing the same thing. I was in a commission-based world and I had deals I was working on. And if you leave, you got 6 months of revenue that you might not get, or 12 months.
Yeah.
So in September of 2008, the two guys who owned the company that I worked for got in a fight. And I was close with both of them. And one was leaving to start another company. One was staying at the company. And I knew that this was going to fracture the company. It was about a 30, 40 person company. And I knew that most of the people were going to want to go with the guy who left. And so at that point, I was like, all right, this may be a perfect opportunity to negotiate an exit. So I went home that day and I said to my wife had a bad day at work, and she said, hey, she was like, hey, she goes, I want to quit my job. I go, well, you can't, because I'm going to quit mine. And so we had a spirited debate at dinner that night. And because I had an idea of what I wanted to do and the timing was a little bit better,
you were a little further along in the process.
Yeah. And we both of us couldn't quit. Right. So I went in the next day and I said to the guy who stayed at the company, I go, look, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to competitor. I'm not even staying in this space, but I will hand over everything I'm working on to you in exchange for, we worked out a kind of financial arrangement, which kind of guaranteed me about a year of income. Mm-hmm. So bought me some time from that perspective. My wife obviously kept working her job. So I left. And Jeff and I did not know each other at the time, actually. Oh. And a lot of people were like, what's Ben up to? I wasn't really talking about this with anybody. I had, like, my one friend who's a benefit consultant knew about it. I think I had one or two conversations. When I told my dad I quit my job, he thought I was crazy. But
you didn't talk to him before.
I didn't tell him I was going to do it because I'm pretty sure he would. Now, my dad's always kind of been pretty, he never tells me what to do. He'll give some strong guidance. Nobody really knew. And a lot of people are like, what's Ben up to? What's Ben up to? And for about 2 months, I just kind of kept to myself. I just said, hey, I really want to figure out if I can do this and figure out what my plan's going to be. One of the first people I told was a guy who worked at the state of Indiana, and was a good friend of mine, and that I was working on. I wasn't even planning on telling him. His name's Scott. I wasn't even planning on telling Scott, but we're at lunch, and he's like, what are you doing? So I told him. He goes, hey, you should meet Jeff Wells. I go, who's Jeff Wells? And he goes, he's running Medicaid for the state of Indiana, really smart guy. He's been in that job almost 2 years, and nobody stays in that job for very long. Like, it's just a really, really hard job. And so he introduced me to Jeff, and Jeff and I really quickly kind of figured out we worked well together. I think how it happened was I think I actually hired him as a consultant originally to help me think through it, but I'm pretty sure I never paid him. And by January or February of 2009, we decided to start the business together. So I had the general concept, I had the general plan already, and Jeff was actually finishing residency, his MBA, and running Medicaid for the state of Indiana all at one time. Wow. So he stepped out of running state Medicaid. He was finished his residency through 2009. I really kind of ran with the business through 2000. I had my first kind of capital or financial hurdle was really figuring out a way. Jeff was in a different situation than I was, where he was the sole breadwinner of a family. He had 3 kids. His wife was just left her job, was taking care of the kids at home. So he needed income. So we had to go raise money to make sure that we could pay him and pay for all the other stuff like lawyers and things. So that was the point where we're like, all right, we got to go raise a little bit of money because we're just burning our own capital right now. And that's right. There's not a ton of that laying around. All
right. So good thing is you've been doing sales. So you've had some sales experience, but raising money is a totally different animal. So what does that look like?
Yes, I knew how to do sales. I was comfortable talking to anybody. I didn't have the credibility in healthcare. Mm-hmm. Jeff has the credibility. One of the things but we had to get some money so that we could pay Jeff. We could pay for a couple other things. So one of the things that was important to me, so we needed $300,000. That was the number we figured out that we needed to make it through 2009. Something that was important to me was that I did not get it from someone that I knew. I wanted to force the discipline of somebody who didn't need to give me money, giving me money and negotiating that deal. Because, at the end of the day, if I had really pushed, I could have gone to my dad, some of my dad's friends, whatever, and figured it out. Like $300,000 is a lot of money, but I could probably figure that out. But I needed the credibility.
Yeah. Somebody else to look at your idea and also say like, all right, I believe in this enough that I'm going to actually put money to work.
And I needed it for my own confidence that this is actually a good idea. It's not just some charity program.
Right.
So,
because you're in uncharted territory. You're like, you know what? I got this idea, but I'm not even sure if it's really good. But yeah, I've done some due diligence. Yeah. But
That's
All right.
right.
So maybe put their money where the mouth is.
That's right. So I talked to a handful of folks. One of the people I talked to was a guy named Mike. Mike, I got introduced to through the benefit consultant that I told you that's a good friend
Yes,
of
hooking
mine.
you up big.
Yeah, and so Mike and I spent a lot. Mike had never done this before. He owns a really awesome business here in Indianapolis, and he said, "All right, I'll do it. I'll give you $300,000." And we negotiated a valuation of the business. I actually don't even remember exactly what it was. I think it was like $1.6 million or $1.8 million was the valuation of the business. And he gave us $300,000. $120,000 of that was debt, and then $180,000 of it was equity. And so we were like, that was the first capital we got. He had never done a deal like this ever. And he laughs. We were just together recently, and he's like, I'm never doing another one of these again. This one was because I have a track record now that no professional investor will ever beat. So he's only done one ever, and it worked out for him. Most people should lose that money. Like that money should go to zero.
Right.
Yeah.
Before you met Mike, how many Mikes were there before you met Mike?
It wasn't like your typical story of talking to 100 and you get one. I think it might have been I talked to 5. It wasn't. It didn't take a super long time. I think the timing was perfect. Many things in life are not about what you did; it's when you did it. And the fact that I had a mutual friend with. And Mike knew enough about this kind of how health insurance worked that he saw a really big opportunity. And this benefit consultant, his name is Andy. Andy knows the space, and Mike trusts Andy.
Right.
So that's how it happened.
Stars were really aligned.
Yeah.
All right. So you get this money, and at this point, it's you and Jeff. Anybody else?
Nope.
Okay. So now you got to go build a team. Or what do you do? What do you do next?
So 2009, Jeff was finishing his residency and his MBA. So he was like, during the day, there were a lot of like conversations with myself. Really, there's nobody else around. Jeff and I we were almost like trains passing in the night sometimes. Like there'd be a window at the end of the day where we'd talk, and a window at the beginning of the day where we talk, but he'd be in residency all day, unavailable. And he would work during the night. I mean, he's a very high performing person. He doesn't need a whole lot of sleep. He retains a ton of information better than anybody that I really actually know. So that through 2009, it was painful because it was so slow. And it was slow because of kind of the structure of how we had started the business. Right. And the other thing that I didn't totally appreciate was how long the sales cycle is for what we do. Even today, it's a year sales cycle. Back then, it was longer. So that was February 2009, we started the company. It was September 2010 before our first dollar revenue.
Okay, so Jeff's finishing school. You're there during the day talking to yourself. Jeff finishes his studies. You team up together. You're now together during the day. And what are you doing? We
are really, at the end of the day, we're out selling. I mean, like most companies need a salesperson as their CEO, their first employee. Somebody needs to be the person that's out selling. Jeff is very good at. Jeff doesn't think he is, but he's very good in presentations. His credibility is like unmatched in a lot of these conversations. But so he and I were out meeting with benefit consultants. We were out meeting with employers. We were just trying to get somebody to bet on us so that we could have that first customer to say that we did it. So it was a year. It took a year and a half to get that first customer.
And how many tries would you say that was? How many?
That was a lot. I mean, hundreds. It was, and we got lucky. We got lucky with our first customer. Our first customer was a publicly traded software company called Interactive Intelligence. It's since been bought by a company called Genesis. That happened a couple of years ago. They wanted to pursue this strategy. We had an opportunity to meet with them. Their head of HR went to their CFO and said, "Hey, I would like to hire these guys." Like, it wasn't even like a company, it was like Ben and Jeff. And their CFO and head of HR went to their CEO, a guy named Don Brown. And Don was a serial entrepreneur. Like, he had started and sold several businesses. And I don't know the whole, like, Interactive they sold. But the company before that was a company called Software Artistry that I think he sold to IBM for hundreds of millions of dollars. And the company before that, I think he sold a business before that for like 50 or 75 million bucks. So this guy is he is your, high performing multi-success entrepreneur. And the story I heard was their CFO and their CHRO went to Don and said, hey, we want to hire these guys. They've never done it before, but we think they can do it. And Don said, every single one of my companies had a first customer. I want to be theirs. Yeah. And this is a publicly traded software company. This is not like, so that's luck. That's about being in the right place at the right time and having at least enough credibility to go do it. And we opened that health center Labor Day of 2010. And that was the first domino to fall for us to kind of build our way up to building a real business where, today, I know we're not talking about today, but we work with some of the largest companies in the world today. We work with Fortune 20 companies today. You can't get those without starting over here.
Right. So before you met that first customer, was there a moment where you were like, hey, Jeff, I'm not really sure this is going to work?
I don't think we ever had the conversations. I'm not sure this is going to work or how much longer are we going to do this. I mean, I guess at some point we would just run out of the money, but it definitely took a lot longer than we thought. It took a lot longer. There were more hurdles than we thought, at least from every employer we were talking to uses a benefit consultant who consults with them. And those folks are the ones that are helping us distribute. But their main job is to make sure that employers are picking the right partners and executing the right strategy. And they want to make sure that the partners that they recommend are rock solid. So asking a benefit consultant or convincing a benefit consultant that they should bet on us and risk their relationship with their client is really challenging.
Right.
So that was one of the biggest hurdles early on for us was we got a lot of, kind of stiff arms saying, well, hey, look, I like you guys, but I'm not betting my relationship with my client on this.
Right. So then, okay, so you get this first proof of concept, if you will, somebody who took a bet on you. And then is that enough to then get the benefit consultants on board?
That was enough to do two things. One, prove that we could do it. And two, gave us the ability and the proof points to go out and raise more money so that we could actually go make that first hire. We could actually go try to build a little bit of scale to this and create a real business versus Ben and Jeff kind of running around and doing this. Like that first health center, we opened Tuesday after Labor Day weekend. He and I were nailing, pictures into the wall. We were making sure the computers were working. We went to Lowe's like 7 times that weekend to get like random stuff. Like I bought flowers to put in the lobby on that Tuesday morning, So that gave us the ability to go raise a little bit of money and go put real kind of structure in place.
But arguably, there needed to be a period of time for that to work. So by signing that first contract, did that give you guaranteed sort of revenue so that you knew that you had some sort of cash flow? Because otherwise you're waiting another year or something like that for this thing to work.
They gave us a 3-year contract. They were interactive. I think our first check was $38,000 for the first month. It was a very profitable customer. So we proved that we could not only sell it, but it was a profitable customer. Very profitable, actually, at that point. So, but it's easy to have profitability when you have no real expenses. So that gave us the proof point to go to a broader set of investors and say, hey, we've got a real business. We've got a real customer that everybody knows. This is a known, employer in the city of Indianapolis. So that was, and they gave us 3 years worth of contract. So we weren't going to lose it for, it was a 7-figure contract right out of the gate.
You win this first contract, you must be high-fiving each other. You must be.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're high five, but you're like, it's kind of a, hey, maybe we do have something here, right? It's like, again, you talk about sort of credibility. It's giving you some confidence that maybe you got something here is what I mean. Yeah. Yes, for sure. It introduces a whole new level of anxiety, but yeah, it's.
Well, anxiety how?
Anxiety, we now actually have to go do this. Like the first doctor we hired, awesome. She's still with the company today. First nurse we hired, awesome. Her name was Christy. She was fantastic. She smiled. She was engaging. Second nurse we hired, which we had 2 nurses there at any given time. So the second nurse, we turned over, I think, 3 times in the first 3 months. Like we couldn't figure out the model. And what we found was that's a really challenging role to hire for. And we went to Christy. We're like, Christy, where are there more of you? And she said the running joke was, well, Ben, there aren't more of me, and she's right. There weren't very many Christys running around. So that part was hard. We did have to put kind of a little bit more structure in place. So we did have to start spending more money at like a corporate level. But so there was definitely like, are people, if we're going to open this, are people actually going to come? They did. And they came a lot. Like, so engagement was really high. So that part was good. We actually expanded the services. Like, I think within like 3 months, we actually added a nurse practitioner nearly immediately. It was a raging success from an engagement perspective and a customer service perspective, but we had to figure out how to duplicate this over and over and over again to build a real business.
And the investors that you went to, were they you had sort of knocked on the doors prior, or was it a whole new sample, a whole new set of folks?
Yeah. So we decided, I'll spare you how we came to the number. We decided we need to raise $600,000, and we decided we're going to try to raise it from anywhere from, 6 to 10 people. One of the guys we went to is a guy named Mike Smith. Mike, we've both known for a long time. So we did not want to go to anybody that was family, but we decided kind of people in our network were now kind of no longer off limits.
Right.
So Mike Smith, who was the CFO of put the WellPoint Anthem merger together. So this guy knows health insurance. He's a very successful guy. Was the first guy to commit $60,000 to that $600,000. He goes, I'll do 10% of it. And he told us that as we were driving to Chicago to meet with a couple of professional investors in Chicago that own a private equity firm. And we're not meeting with them to have their firm invest in our company, but we were meeting with them potentially as individual investors. So we got connected through a mutual fund. We actually didn't know them. We didn't. And so there's a firm called Beacon Petty O'Keefe, and Ken O'Keefe, Bill Petty, and Dave Beacon. We met with them, and it was the most intimidating meeting I've ever had in my life. And these, like, you're in this real fancy conference room in downtown Chicago with these guys who are pros. Like this is the first time I'd ever met like a real private equity investor. It was intimidating. Like, it was probably the most, if I think about, I actually told Ken this story a couple months ago. If I think about all the most intimidating meetings I've ever been in, that was probably it.
By the way, did you have answers to all their questions? Like, how did it go?
Well, it went well enough that Ken O'Keefe and Bill Petty actually invested. And this is small world, right timing, right place kind of thing. Mike Smith had been an operating partner and an investor in Beacon Petty that we didn't know that when we were in the room. But Mike Smith came up. They said, hey, do you have any other investors? And we said, well, actually, Mike Smith, just as we're driving up to Chicago, Mike just committed $60,000. And we know Mike. We love Mike. So that helped. And so Ken and Bill invested. And the next day, we met with some other prospective investors that were called like high net worth families here in town. And 2 of those families had invested in Beacon Petty. Wow. And made a ton of money with Beacon Petty. So like, well, hey, if Ken and Bill are doing this, we'll do it too. So we raised that $600,000. Actually, I think we raised $635,000. We oversubscribed it a little bit. Ken O'Keefe really kind of led that round on behalf of the investors at the time. Now, Ken had a full-time job, so he was not involved in the business at all. They were doing their own thing. And for these guys, it was relatively small dollars. That gave us enough money to, make our first hire, which we hired kind of a guy named Dave Ritzler. Dave was our finance lead, an ops lead. Dave's still with the company today. That was one of the most critical hires because it was somebody to kind of operationalize the financial part of the business.
And was that a hard hire, by the way?
He kind of fell in our lap. He was at something called the Butler Business Accelerator, and he had called on us because the Butler Business Accelerator is affiliated with Butler University. They work with small businesses. They kind of act as an external CFO. He had called on us trying to sell us Butler Business Accelerator services. We're like, this guy's great. Let's just hire him. So he'll tell the story that we're better salespeople than he is. And he joined the company then. And that was our first hire. And he was the one like, hey, we got this $635,000. We need someone to make sure we don't run out of it.
Right.
So while Jeff at that point was really more focused on making sure the interactive intelligence health center was going well, I was more focused on trying to find that second customer.
Number two. Right. So how do you find number two?
We found it the same way we found number one. So there's a company called One America here in Indianapolis that is a big, well-known company that decided they wanted to pursue this kind of strategy as well. It started to make news, kind of an employer clinic strategy.
And by the way, sorry. So just understand, are there others at this time that are doing this?
There's one that at this time there's one big company doing it.
So they're helping educate, for lack of a better phrase or term, they're helping educate the marketplace that there's something like this.
So on-site health centers have been around a long time. Some employers have managed it themselves, but when we talk about being around a long time, we're talking about really big employers, like 10,000 plus employees kind of thing. The market that we were targeting was like, well, hey, that works really well for these companies who have tons of resources and tens of thousands of employees. How do you build something that's scalable to medium large businesses of Indianapolis at the time? So no one had really done it for that type of employer yet, but there was a company that was doing it for those really big employers. And then there were, I don't know, you started to see a couple little companies pop up across the US. There's actually one in Indianapolis that got bought by a competitor probably 10 years ago or so, eight years ago maybe. But for the most part, it was a bunch of small companies. There was not really a true player in this space yet.
But at least you got a little bit more of a sales force, right? It's sort of telling the story of what your business is, whether it's another competitor or not, doesn't matter. It's just they're raising awareness.
That's right.
Certainly helps.
That's right.
Okay, so then One America.
Yeah, they're customer number two, and they signed up. Yeah, they signed up because they saw what we were doing at Interactive Intelligence. Interactive Intelligence was a raving fan,
right?
So and One America is bigger than Interactive Intelligence. So the snowball started building.
All right. So cool. So things are going well in Indianapolis, but it got a big old world. So how do you get out of Indiana?
The first customer we had outside of Indiana was a company called CNO that owns a bunch of different businesses. One called Bankers Life, one called Washington National. So they were the first one that took us out of the state of Indiana. But what we figured out was, while the on-site clinics is a really great opportunity, healthcare is largely delivered at a local level. And if you can go deep into geography, you're almost better off than going wide across the US. So we started focusing on like, hey, how do we become the biggest independent primary care physician group in a focused area, like at the time, Indianapolis? So that's where we came up with this near site strategy where we're going to open up a network of health centers, and instead of employers opening their own on-site health center, they're going to open up a network of health centers, and it eliminates the friction up front, creates choice for the patient. So they have you not only get close to where they work, but you get close to where they live. So you get higher spouse engagement, and the ROI was much higher for the employer, and the customer was stickier with us because there was not really another solution like that. That was 2012 or so that we really started seeing like there's a really cool opportunity. But again, that came to the next opportunity to go raise money.
So you go to that next opportunity, with relative ease.
So we did the first round with Mike in 2009, with the second round with Ken and a broader group in 2010. That group did another round in 2011 because we were starting to click. We were starting to sign up a couple of customers at a time, and we didn't raise any money, I don't believe, in 12. In 2013, we decided we were going to raise $2.5 million. We recognized we were going to have to expand the group of folks we were going to need to raise. That was the point. That was the first time we're like, okay. And that was when we also started getting calls from private equity. We were getting calls from private equity saying, hey, you guys need to spend way more money. Let us give you $10 million. Let us give you $15 million. Don't go. You got a model. It's cool. Go scale it. We weren't really quite ready for that yet. So we went and by the way, there's a debate whether this was the right or wrong answer. We decided to go raise $2.5 million from the same group that had now invested 2 rounds. We added a few more folks to that round. And we continued to stomp out the model that was working at the time versus taking money from private equity.
As this business is getting bigger, it must be getting more difficult to manage.
It's getting more difficult, but at that point, we probably had, in 2012, we had, I think the business is probably about 9 million of revenue or so. We had 10 or 12 kind of corporate employees. So we were starting to build out some structure. We had someone who led account management for us. We had someone who led finance for us. We had someone who was leading technology for us. But we're also hiring, you're hiring a different type of person at that stage of a business. And if you're going to execute the plan that you want to, you're hiring different folks at that stage than you're hiring 2 years later. And some of these folks, like Dave, who I talked about earlier, Dave has grown with the business at every step of the business. Not everybody does that. That's the hardest part.
When is your first child born?
My first child was born 2000. Well, I have twin boys that were both born in February 2012.
Okay, so things are humming at work and at home.
Oh yeah, life's getting a lot more expensive. It's not a $900 mortgage anymore. It became more challenging at home. But my wife's awesome. My wife's the ultimate, she's comfortable with risk and she's comfortable with stress, and she was comfortable with us not having a ton of revenue for ourselves. And she understood that protecting, kind of from an entrepreneurial perspective, protecting ownership of a business was more important than getting paid more today. At the time, 2000.
Well, that must have helped a lot, because I'm a big believer of, everything starts at home and you need that strong support.
Yeah, that's right. She's she's always trusted me. And if she is a little bit, she's like all of us, right? Like my spouse is like the person I have to convince something's a good idea, and she's always been on board for kind of this business. Without that, it doesn't really work very well.
That's amazing, because that gives you, the foundation at home so that you can actually focus on work. How do we get to private equity actually making sense for the firm?
Yeah, that's a good question. So once we launched that network, so we raised $2.5 million. We launched this network of health centers in Indianapolis. That worked really well, really, really well. And we very quickly launched Charlotte as our second market for that model. And that worked really well. That was about the time we're like, okay, we've got to make a decision here. We need more capital, because that was a more capital intensive product. We had to go build health centers in markets. We had, when we launched Charlotte, it cost us, $6 million to open that market. Indianapolis is probably about $4 million. We're building health center for staffing with our own physicians, nurse practitioners, health coaches. There's upfront costs with it. So that was about the time we started talking to private equity. We got very, very close in 2000, I think it was 2015, maybe 2016, of doing a deal with a private equity firm. Instead, it was 2014. Instead, we decided to do what's called a venture debt deal. So venture debt is, there are these lenders who are the non-traditional lenders. They don't loan based on EBITDA. They don't loan on traditional covenants. They will loan based on revenue covenants and others. But when they do these deals, they traditionally make the large shareholders personally guarantee the debt. So if you want to talk about having the conversation with my wife, I blocked out the number. I swear to God, I think it was $15 million that we personally guaranteed. Jeff's family and my family. So they made our wives come into the office with notaries and all kinds of stuff around and sign all the mountains of documents. And my wife, she's like, so explain to me how this works. I go, well, here's the deal. The company goes out of business. We owe $15 million. They will take everything, and we still own probably $15 million. So it's not an asset-backed loan where you're selling equipment and cars and buildings. It's like the business goes under. The only value of the business is the business. So we did that. That was probably the most stressful period of life. Now, we chose to do that instead of taking private equity. And again, this is a point where I'm not 100% sure we made the right decision, but I know why we made the decision. We decided to make the venture debt decision because those guys don't take board seats. They don't have any control. We can do whatever we want with the business. We didn't want the distraction of a board that had private equity on it at the time. The private equity firm that we turned down has had a ton of success. They're very, very good. They may have forced discipline that would have been good for us at the time. I'm just not, and maybe we would have had a better business because of it. I think that's possible. I'm open-minded to that. That's possible. I will say that if we'd done that, we would not have the distraction of this debt covenants and this distraction of the personal guarantee, which weighs on you significantly for 2 or 3 years.
So how does it weigh on you? I want to understand like what that's, you're saying, honey, if this doesn't work, we owe $15 million. I'm just trying to get inside that conversation.
Yeah. So the conversation with my wife was actually easy. She was game. She's like, all right, if you think this is right, I'm game. I think that it weighs on you from 2 perspectives. One, in the back of the mind, you know that. And then 2, from a financial perspective and running a business perspective, we were paying them an interest rate every month. So cash was going out the door to this venture debt firm that we could have been spending on product enhancement, salespeople, training for our employees, all kinds of other stuff that we would have been able to spend money on that if we had done the deal with private equity, because we would not have the debt at the same time. So
it makes sense. So that's stress. And I asked that question for somebody who might be listening, right?
Yeah.
Who has that situation at some point in their life.
So the good news for me was I had someone, so Jeff, who's one of my best friends, and at the time we started business, we did not know each other. Like today, we've gone through this together. So there's someone right there who's going through the exact same thing as you and having the exact same conversations at home. So that helped.
It could have arguably hurt because you got double the amount of pressure because it's not just me, but I'm also going to take down this other.
Yeah. And the reality is, as an entrepreneur, you always have this stress because there's the stress of you start at some point, you realize, hey, there's not only just me and my family and my kids, there's all these other employees. All of a sudden you have 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 employees. You're like, oh, wow, there's 5, 10, 50, 100 families that need their salary to pay for their lives. And you get to know all of them. You become friends with them. You know their kids. You know they're like, you hang out with them socially. Like it's not just your family. It's multiply that, and today multiply it by 2,000. It's everybody has the same. You get the same pressure as you do otherwise, whether that debt existed or not. You kind of get to the point where, like in entrepreneurship, like there are really, really high highs, there's really, really low lows, and you kind of train yourself. And sometimes there's days that those both happen multiple times. You train yourself to kind of stay in the middle. Don't overreact to the highs. Don't overreact to the lows. You have to train yourself to put your phone away when you get home, because it's very easy as an entrepreneur to at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night be on your phone or looking at sending emails or doing work. Like you have to turn it off every once in a while. And you also have to send the right message to your team. Like if you're sending emails at 9 o'clock at night and Sunday mornings and Saturday nights, your team's going to interpret that as like, well, that's what I should be doing too. Nothing is ever fatal, and nothing is ever like a lottery ticket at the end of the day.
You said something. Can we talk about the lows are really low? Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah. The lows for us at that point, really, so we don't lose customers. We still today don't lose customers. Our retention rate's like 98. What we do, the ROI is there. I think the lows for us are really around losing opportunities. Like if you think that you've got a really great customer or a really great, a person you're trying to recruit to your team, and they say no to you, like those are lows. Every once in a while you have an employee that you love working with, or a partner that you love working with that leaves. Those are lows. You never want to miss numbers. Like I've been, for 15 years, so I've had 60 plus board meetings. Of those 60, every once in a while, they don't go very well, and you miss some numbers. You get punched in the face by your board, or there's something you should have been able to see around that corner. That happens. Those are lows. You miss things you shouldn't miss at home. You miss like kids events. You miss, things that other people might be able to generally get around going to. You miss vacations. I've missed vacations. Both physically, I actually haven't been there, or I've been there, but I've been stuck in a hotel room because something's going on, which everybody has going on. There's those lows as well.
So you talk about the family, and I wonder, having gone through the experience of doing this, would you encourage your twins to set sail on an entrepreneurial path?
It's funny. We're talking about right now. So they're 11. They don't have a job yet, but I think next summer I want them to be doing. They have jobs at home where they can make money, and we've got accounts set up for them, and they can see it, and they can see when they want to spend money on something like Roblox or whatever. They're spending their own money. I grew up mowing lawns, and I think that that's a great place to learn business. We're talking about, I don't know if my kids are entrepreneurs or not. I'm the only entrepreneur on both sides of our family. Both sides of our family are very low risk, kind of personalities. So I don't know if they're entrepreneurs or not, but what I do want to do is I want to at least teach them what it's like. And we've talked about I basically sat down with our boys. I was like, hey, this is what a pro forma is. We're going to build a lawn mowing company pro forma. If all you did was buy a lawnmower and mow my yard and grandfather's yard down the street, and here's how much I spend today, here's how much he spends today, we're both going to pay you less because you have less experience. They're like, that's not fair. Like, that's life,
Right.
We're looking to save money. So, but hey, if you buy a lawnmower, I'll loan you the money to buy the lawnmower, but you got to pay me back. And here's how it works. And I want to at least teach them that. I don't know if they're entrepreneurs or not.
So what does that mean to be an entrepreneur, whether they're entrepreneurs or not? How do you define that?
You've got, not everybody's ready, willing, and able and wants to take the risk of starting a business. Not everybody really wants that type of lifestyle.
And where do you think that came from for you? Now, I understand what you said was, look, I wanted to be my own boss, but you're saying your family was low risk. So
yeah, I think for me, I've always had a little. So I grew up in a family with a bunch of overachievers. Both of my sisters on either side of me were overachievers, and I was a very, very average at best student. And I was the one that my parents were regularly putting pressure on to do better. I kind of learned what it was like to fail early and always feel like I wasn't doing very well. And by the time I was 23, 24, 25, all that lack of confidence growing up that I had, I recognized, look, things can go really bad, but they can turn out just fine. And nothing's like failure is actually good. So I kind of learned that early. And I also moved around schools a lot when I was younger, and I always moved at weird times. So my parents were always hunting for the school that would make me a better student. I moved at weird times, and I remember in fifth grade going to a new school and not knowing anybody and not being shy and sitting at a round table with 8 chairs by myself at lunch for, a couple of weeks and realizing, what, I got to go talk to people. It's not their job to come, make me feel welcome. So forcing that, I still have anxiety if I see a round table with 8 chairs at it, in a cafeteria. That makes me uncomfortable. But you know what? I was one day I was I'm going to go. I remember that day. I was I had my tray. I was I'm going to go sit at some table with some people. I don't care who they are. And I did. And one of the people I sat down is one of my best friends today. One of my best friends that lives in my neighborhood. Our wives are really good friends. Our kids play together. We vacation together. And that happened to me a bunch all the way through school, even through college. I just have a risk tolerance that I think other folks in my family or that I grew up around don't have.
Quite a mature decision to make, or a realization in the mid-20s that hey, I failed a bunch of times and it's okay. That's quite a realization. I think there are probably people who in their whole life don't make that realization.
I remember sitting, one of the people, he doesn't probably know this. There's a guy named Fred Klipsch. Fred's an Indianapolis guy, bunch of business. Klipsch Audio is the one he's probably most known for, the speakers that are the home audio speakers. They make a couple others. I remember having dinner with him. I was working on something, actually back in my real estate deal. So I was working on something with him, representing him on something. And he was telling us these stories. And he told us a story about One day he's like, oh, everyone I know who owns a car dealership, these make money hand over fist. So because I'm gonna go buy a car dealership. Buys a car dealership because lost his shirt. He goes, I can't figure out how they make money. He goes, I don't want anything to do with this anymore. So he goes, I sold it. A year later, he's like, I think I figured it out. Bought another one, lost money again. Sold that one. He's like, I'm done with car dealerships. There's some story like that. And he's like, you know what? He can't be afraid to like fail, and there's never a perfect time to do it. I'm comfortable with that. I'm going to fail again in other things, right? It hasn't been all A's with the business we got today, but that's just life. And some people aren't comfortable with not getting all A's.
Where does the business go from here?
20, we did a deal with a private equity firm called General Atlantic. So they're a $70 billion private equity firm. We, in partnership with them, bought a competitor, merged the two businesses together. So we do have private equity backing today. It's kind of a different, business today. A lot of structure, a lot of really, really, kind of a different level of folks that we've got kind of working in and around us. The tailwinds in our space are pretty strong. It's a well-known kind of solution today. So we feel the business is on a trajectory to be, a really big part of how healthcare is solved kind of in the foreseeable future. I talked about in the mid 2000s, healthcare per family was like $8,000 a year. People were like, this is unsustainable. This is ridiculous. It's like $22,000 today. So it's not getting better. There's nobody solving it. Like health insurance companies aren't really solving it, not motivated to. Health systems have their own challenges with solving it. Somebody has to be in the middle of it and start with primary care, and that's where we sit.
In 2020, so now venture capital comes into the picture. You were talking before about somebody outside board seats, people having an opinion. What's that been like to, arguably you're giving up some of the control, not arguably, you are giving up some of the control, right? So, right. Yeah. So what is that? So how has that transition been as a person who has been so hands-on the business?
There was a period, so through I would call it 2006, we started getting called on by a lot of private equity firms, really kind of all of them. And I probably did 100 of those calls a year. Those 4 years, and really got to know. Yeah, I mean, wow. like not all of them were hour. They're not like presentations, but these are like, Ken O'Keefe, who's founder of Beacon Petty O'Keefe. He invested in every round of our business. He got jumped on our board in 2017 after he was transitioning out of Beacon Petty. He was transitioning that business, kind of the next round of leaders for them. He stepped on our board, and he was a fantastic mentor for me of how to manage those conversations with private equity. Like he was the one who forced the discipline for myself to not just let any private equity firm call me and suck me for information and not give anything in return. Mm-hmm. Like Ken coached me up like, hey, you make sure you're talking to someone who actually fits the profile of your business. Like at the time we were, 50 some odd $50 million, in the business top line. And, when he first joined, he's like, look, ask him, do they invest in businesses this size and scale? What are their parameters? Do they have an EBITDA minimum? Ask those questions, because you might find in the first 5 minutes, they're never, ever going to invest in your company. And at that point, if they don't fit the profile of your company, turn the tables, ask them questions. Find out what they know about your space. If they don't know anything, don't waste time.
And is it the sense that many of those were setting up those calls to extract information from you?
I would say that's a way to describe it. Folks who go into private equity are very, very smart, and they are very good learners. They are very good at being thoughtful and building a thesis around a strategy. And what they're really doing when they're calling on businesses like myself is they're building out their thesis and their strategy and their conviction in it to what they're going to convince or sell to their partners is why they should make an investment in a particular space. So a lot of them, what they're really doing is they're just trying to learn. They're just trying to understand the space, and they're trying to understand the different players in the space. Some private equity firms will pick a sector, and then they'll pick if that sector has 6 different businesses, some of them would rather pick the 6 out of 6 player and spend less on that. Some wants to pick the best and spend more. Like some have a growth thesis, which means they're going to, invest in the business. Some have a synergies thesis where they're going to actually pull costs out and they're going to trade it, on a arbitrage. So you really kind of have to learn from our seat, like what their strategy is, what their parameters are.
Mm-hmm.
And the General Atlantic guys that we ended up doing the deal with, first time we met them was in 2018. I mean, we knew them for 2 years before we did a deal with them. I bet we spent, before we signed the deal with them in 2019, hundreds of hours with those guys.
Wow.
And we got comfortable with them because what we got conviction around was, because we were doing our diligence on all these private equity firms too. We got conviction around them as the best partner for us in this business with what we wanted to do with it over the next 5 years. They're a growth-oriented investor, really smart guys. You got to want to hang out with the people you're going to work with. You got to have a productive, positive relationship with them, which we do. There's always tension in that relationship because they are, and I'm not talking about our partners, I'm talking about all private equity. They measure themselves by how much money they make for their partners and their customers. So themselves, their partners, their bosses, and their investors or / customers are measuring them on a return of invested capital. That's the metric that they're measured against. That's it. It's pretty simple. That tension, Ken said to me, he goes, look, the day that you're most aligned with your private equity partner is the day you close the deal. As time goes on, you get further and further apart because private equity is here for a good time, not a long time. Like our partners are a little bit traditionally more longer hold focused, but it's pretty safe to say that on average, private equity holds for 5 years. Ours are probably more like 7 or 8. We're approaching the 4-year anniversary with them. We're somewhere in the middle, but I understand how they measure themselves. I understand what's important to them. They understand what's important to us. So we understand each other. There's healthy tension there. We get frustrated with each other occasionally, but that was the part of the diligence that you have to make sure that like the people you're working with, you can have productive disagreement with, positive conflict with. And so far, our conflict with our private equity partners has generally been positive conflict. I do have lots of friends who have started business in private equity deals. I've gotten real sideways with a private equity partner. It's uncomfortable.
So we're talking about uncomfortable. So what's making you uncomfortable now?
I think that there's 2 things. Now, while we do have a private equity partner that is solid and we've got the capital we need to run the business, we're not looking to raise money. As we make acquisitions, which I think there will be opportunities, the capital markets aren't as good as they were a year or 2 ago. There's been a retrenchment, especially on the lending side. So and our private equity partners are like this, as most are. They use leverage to some extent to make acquisitions. If the leverage is gone, then they can't pay as much for the asset. So valuations come down because of that. How long that lasts is, it creates some challenges for the business. I worry about kind of the macro trend of the economy. However, I do think that creates opportunity for our business because we have a real tangible ROI. We reflect back over this conversation we've had. We started a business at the beginning of a recession. Like I started this business in 2000. I quit my job in late 2008. Nobody was quitting their job in late 2008. And I was miserable. I think that recession helped us because employers are looking for what benefits can I give my employees that's at least cost neutral. If it has an ROI, it's icing on the cake. So I think a recession helps our business. I worry about retention of talent because in healthcare, there's been a lot of burnout because of COVID. COVID was very challenging. I think that maybe, I think education and healthcare are the 2 parts of our economy that get hit the hardest as far as like just forcing folks to work in environments they're not used to because of COVID. Now we've come out of that, but it's still, there's some lingering issues with that, I think. Those are the things I worry about.
But if you talk about tailwinds, does the hybrid work environment help or hurt your business?
Most of our customers never went virtual. Like we have lots of school corporations. We somehow figured out a niche in food processing. Like some of the largest food processors in the country, Tyson, Cargill, to name a few. Those are like 2 of the, 10 largest private employers in the country. Never went virtual. City, county governments never went virtual. Manufacturing never went virtual. So most of our customers never went virtual. Those that did were largely customers of ours. So we have this network strategy. So we weren't on site anyway, and we have a virtual extension of that product. So it didn't really change the model. We have a handful of customers. So Interactive Intelligence would be one of them. They're bought by a company out in San Francisco called Genesis. They've gone pretty much fully virtual. They shut down the health center that we manage for them. But I think of our 300-ish health center, we had 220 or so when COVID started. Less than 6 or 7 were affected by work from home.
But arguably, the ones that were on site could go to a near site model.
They could, and I think that there will be a lot of that. And that's where the most exciting part of our business is the near site. Now, a lot of our customers, especially some of those that I just mentioned, have an on-site health center and they love it. They want it just for themselves. And a lot of them, the Tyson Cargills is the example. They're in very rural parts of America. They're in towns where they are the largest employer and they are, very, very rural. So they're not a near site strategy for those.
All right. Well, I'm watching the clock and I don't want to take up more of your time. So maybe we could leave with fascinating conversation that's covered a lot of topics, but what I want to give you an opportunity to share something we may not have covered or that you'd like to cover.
Around entrepreneurship, the thing that I think was most helpful for me was to surround myself with people that had either done it or were doing it with me. And, I had a network of friends that had started businesses and kind of gone through the challenges. I have one of our board members had a business that went bankrupt. Having folks around that can help you navigate that is super helpful. I think that what served us the best early on was we really just weren't afraid. And the thing that I was waiting for, the reason why it took me 2 years to quit my job was because I was waiting for the perfect time. There's no perfect time. It's like deciding when you're going to have a kid. Right? Like there's always some vacation or something that's going on that hey, let's wait 6 months or whatever. It's the same thing. There's never a perfect time. The sooner you do it, the better off you are usually.
Great advice. Ben, thanks so much for taking this time with us to share your story. It's been really great to listen to.
No, thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me. It's super fun.